Okay, so we are discussion group C for TEL 703. And what we thought we would do again this week is to really kind of answer both questions. The first question being about what we think about design thinking as a tool and how it relates to our problem of practice and what we can do for our own innovation. And then the second question really focusing on, what issues are we wrestling with as we consider possible designs for our innovation. And I think probably the most important thing, what do we want our group members to help us think about in regard to the innovation? I think that's probably a pretty important part. So I'm going to turn it over to whoever wants to start first. I'm not sure if Kim or Leslie, if you want to start. Leslie, you want to go first?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, so for the first question, so looking at the various sources, I actually found the first source from, let's say, Razuk and Shute to be the most helpful or applicable for me. And when I looked at it, the one quote that I really liked on page 35 was, if we are serious about preparing students to succeed in the world, we should not require that they memorize facts and repeat them on demand. Rather, we should provide them with opportunities to interact with content, think critically about it, and use it to create new information. So from that, I got not only are the teachers supposed to be, or leaders, school leaders, I guess you could say, supposed to be using design thinking, but also encouraging that within the students. And so if I let's put on the black hat first. The black hat is caution, difficulties, risks, and weaknesses. So my concern with that is that some people prefer just being handed so again, sorry, my POP is dealing with teachers supporting English learners in the classroom. So some teachers would prefer to just be handed the correct strategy to help English learners. And design thinking doesn't have that sort of black or white, this is right, this is wrong answer. So I could see some teachers having trouble with that. But then on the positive end of that, it's helpful because design thinking is helpful because it suggests that integrative thinking is necessary. So instead of a single correct way to support English learners, it will vary from teacher to teacher, class to class, and student to student, which is really what I'm most interested in.
You, Kim?
Yeah, thanks, Leslie. I really liked this. I think it was from the video. Natasha Jen, when she said that design thinking addresses the human concerns of design. So she had the images of the vegetable peeler and each one is different, and thinking about, for example, somebody with arthritis, which one would they choose versus a professional athlete? And since my problem of practice is on special education teacher evaluation, we're always thinking about different ways to approach design of instruction. And in fact, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act explicitly talks about specially designed instruction. And so I really got a lot out of this design thinking. And in fact, the article talks a lot about novice to expert. And this is one of the theories that I'm using for my chapter 2, and how novice to expert. What I'm kind of curious about is how am I going to look at novice to expert as well as job resources and demands for each of these crucial points along the educator career continuum. So that's just kind of what I was thinking in terms of design thinking, and kind of wondering how do you design, if you're looking at novice to expert, you have to take all of these things into consideration, and kind of like our stages of concern that we're looking at too. I'm thinking I really like the stages of concern questionnaire, because you can really get at where do people fit, and are they more concerned about personal interests or the task at hand. So that's kind of where I was coming from with that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, as I said before, I'm very much in this pro design thinking bin, I guess. I've read Tim Brown, and And I said before we started the video, you know, we've had Owen Rogers, who's from IDEO, which is one of the biggest design thinking firms, has been to our campus. And to me, kind of, you know, the interesting thing about design thinking is that in a sense, it's almost like a little bit of an action research where it's iterative, it's flexible, it's focused on collaboration between kind of designers and users. There's an emphasis on bringing ideas to life based on really how users think, feel, and behave, right? So when you know, going back to the video about the peeler, you know, I think in some ways the negatives of what I think her name was Natasha Jen, right? The negatives of what she had to say, and kind of use that as an example of the stupidity of design thinking, I think just reemphasize how important it really is, right? Like taking into account that there is no one person for everything, right? And I'll give you a great example of design thinking. I'm left-handed, right? So people that are left-handed obviously have different uses of different utilitarian tools, right? Scissors, markers, pens, notebooks, spirals, all those things, right? And like that's a design thinking iterative process. But to me, like when I think of design thinking, I think of it like really in 5 different ways, right? So one is like understanding the needs of the people that are involved in it, right? Like that's kind of that empathizing side. Then kind of reframing and defining it, and really think of it in like a human-centric way. So really, how do we define what it is? And then how do we create really ideation sessions, so to speak? How do we kind of keep going through this process of creating and prototyping? And that creating and prototyping can happen multiple times before you get to that final, which is really developing that solution, right? And I think in a sense, that's probably what we're all doing in our action research, right? I mean, we're not there yet, but I think the understanding of what our problem of practice is, I think for many of us, that was probably one of the harder things, right? Like 1, is it a problem? 2, to what degree is it a problem? And 3, well, what does that actually mean if it's a problem, right? That's all in that kind of first 2 steps of design thinking, that empathizing and defining portion. So it's very exciting, because a company like IDEO, where Tim Brown is from, like that is what they've done for years, right? And sometimes it's about little things, and sometimes it's about big monumental changes. So just one quick example, I think it's in Switzerland. They have the largest organ donor rate in the world. And people thought, oh my God, what are they doing? They're doing all these tremendous things. No, they're not. They made it very easy. It's an opt-out, right? You have to opt out to not donate your organs, right? It's because they clearly defined that if we want to get more people to do this, we'll just make it do. What's the one thing people hate to do? Well, they don't like to go and have to fill out forms and do all these things. So great, you're in unless you're out, right? So those are little tipping points, and that's very much like a Malcolm Gladwell kind of tipping point thought of things as well. So I think that's where it's really interesting. So
Great.
And then the second, so I think we go to the second question, which is, you know, what issues are you wrestling with as you consider possible designs for your educational innovation? And what would you like your group members to help you think about in regards to that innovation? So maybe we'll just go back around again. Leslie, if you want to start.
Sure. So my problem of practice is essentially that not all content area teachers are empowered to support English learners in their classrooms at the high school level. And I guess intended innovation is sort of twofold. I would like to create sort of like online resources and like a toolkit for all teachers. But then in addition to that, I'd like to have like a professional learning community of just a select group of teachers to begin with, where really the professional learning community is where sort of the design thinking would take place, because that's where they would bring in their actual student work samples, their actual lessons, what they're doing with the students, and be able to collaborate and work together to come up with solutions. So that's what I'm thinking for the innovation. I'm not sure at this point where I need help with it. But I feel like it's still really early in the process.
Yeah, definitely. Kim?
Well, I touched on it before, but I'm thinking about So I'm thinking, I'm getting more focused. I'm thinking more about teachers who work with more severe, students with more severe disabilities, and then also emotional and behavioral disorders, because oftentimes these special education teachers are in these small environments. Uh, Small environments, I mean, a small number of students within each classroom. And the tricky part about it is, like you, Leslie, I want to use a similar type of like professional learning community or community of practice. But there are usually only, what's tricky about K-12 is a lot of times for grade level teams or for special education teacher teams, you only have 2 or 3 people within the school, for example, who are third grade teachers or who are special education teachers. And so I'm looking at helping the special education teachers design a special education teacher evaluation tool that would be more helpful to them. And but I want to use one taxonomy, which is called data-based individualization. So I want to bring in this professional learning, but then I also want to include these other elements. So I guess where I could use some help is, how do I at the same time teach data-based individualization, yet also as an essential component for providing specially designed instruction for students with disabilities, yet at the same time bring in, open it up with this design thinking about the other elements that are crucial to the special education teacher evaluation system. For example, like reaching out to parents is important, promoting inclusive practices in the general education classroom for kids with disabilities. So things like that. I want to do, both things are important. And so how do you contextualize those two things? And I know we only have a few minutes, but that's kind of where I am.
You know, it's so interesting to hear you guys talk about it, because I'm obviously not in K-12 at all, right? And I come from higher ed, and in a sense, my problem, which is about how do we really improve interdepartmental communication within departments and divisions that are siloed, frankly. In some senses, it's not even just a higher ed problem, right? It's kind of an organizational communication problem.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, since March, since I guess we started this program, I think my idea of the intervention has really changed, where I thought, well, let's just throw technology into it, right? Like let's find somebody that everyone can interact, and whether it's using Slack or some kind of this, you know, centralized communication system. And I think the more I go into this, the more I'm learning that there needs to be, and this is part of what I'm writing for chapter 2, is that there needs to be informal and formal communication, internal communication channels that exist, right? Like why is it that, you know, people at a certain level of employment all have the information and it doesn't go up or doesn't go down, right? Like, and so it's frustrating in a sense, because I just feel like, you know, if we could all just figure this out, we would be running like a high-powered machine. But then I also realize that there's high-powered smaller machines running at different levels, and how do we get them all to scale up, right? And that's where meeting with Dr. Tracy from the School of Communication came in, to talk about this kind of scaling of excellent work. How do we take a small group that's doing something excellent and then just kind of get everyone doing it, right? So it's interesting, but it's from a design thinking perspective, it's clearly like I'm clearly in the iterative process where I've got to do all this researching of what's working, what's not, what will work for one does not work for others. And finally, at some point in the future, I'm going to have to come to a point where I say, okay, this is going to be the model that we're all going to go into, and fit into it or not, we're all going, right?
You know what you're making me think of is, we provide these office hours at work, literacy office hours for special education teachers. And it's designed a little bit differently, but I mean, what you made me think of is having office hours for staff, where that what becomes interesting is you always provide a little piece of information that everybody kind of like needs. So it's optional, but it starts the word of mouth. So people don't have to be there, but the people who are there become part of this larger community. And then you go into breakout rooms and they can talk about a specific topic, and then come, and it's like an optional once, you know, once a month or once every 3 weeks or something.
Yeah, so that's really what I'm learning. And so talking to Dr. Tracy in the School of Communication, she just like literally 6 months ago wrote this article about something called positive deviance case selection, which basically identifies and investigates teams, individuals, and organizations whose communication is like intentional and non-normative. So this has like totally changed my whole thought process about it.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting to see where it can go, right?
What is that called? I want to.
It's called positive deviance case selection, PDCS.
Okay.
So, and I can send you guys the article that she wrote, but it's really interesting stuff. And it's very much an organizational communication kind of theory.
You might also check with Dawn DeLay, and I can send you her information too. Okay. She's out of ASU, and she is presenting for this. I'm hosting this Disability and Advocacy in Higher Education colloquium series in the spring. And it's like once a month, and she's doing something about how educational entities communicate with each other. This sounds like right up your
definitely. Perfect.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right.
I think we're good.
Yeah, I think we're really good.
All right. So with that, we will stop recording. Thank you very much.